Let's talk ovulation. Now, as someone that doesn't want kids, doesn't like kids, I've kind of had a complicated relationship with ovulation. And because of this complicated relationship with ovulation, I decided to go on more, I'd say more extreme forms of birth control. For instance, the one I'm currently thinking of is the Depo shot. Now, if you want me to do a side video on why I think it's more extreme, let me know. But it's kind of within the spectrum of birth controls. It's the one that has the highest efficacy, but also the most side effects. Now, at the time, I didn't care about side effects. I was just looking at efficacy, the most effective type of birth control to prevent any type of mishap. And I honestly think if I would have had the knowledge that I do now, if someone would have sat me down and told me about ovulation, how it is so much more than just for reproduction, I probably wouldn't be here as a cycle health educator or coach. I think I probably would have just gone a different route because through getting on birth control, having those horrible side effects, and through my now journey of trying to heal my hormones naturally, having a better relationship with my body, I think things would have ended up a lot differently. So, which is why I like to educate about this and I like to talk about how ovulation is so much more than reproduction, because this is not something among the list of things that aren't taught to us, but this is one of those things that aren't taught to us, especially within the framework of it not being about fertility, having babies, especially for those that don't want babies. There is kind of like a disconnect with, at least for me, anyways, with my body because it is, I'm actively trying not to do what it wants to do, and having that framework doesn't quite work for me. So that's why I like to educate around a different framework, one that focuses on our own health, our own body, and our own overall well being. All right, so let's get into it. So, ovulation is actually the main event of our cycle, which we usually think of our period being the main event because it's the thing that we most see. Like, I'm actively bleeding, this is like the main thing of my cycle. But in actuality, ovulation is the main event. And the reason for that is because it is what our body is ramping up to do. So, what our body is doing from menses to ovulation is ramping up to ovulation, and then post ovulation, what happens after ovulation. Now, the reason that we have hormones, our hormones being estrogen and progesterone, the reason that we have these two hormones is because of ovulation. So, what happens is from menses through our follicular phase, we are producing estrogen. So, it'll slowly increase. I'll have a diagram so it's a little bit easier to visualize. So, it starts to slowly increase, estrogen does, up until a peak. When there is like this threshold of estrogen, is when ovulation occurs. Now, during this time, the follicles, there's about a handful of follicles that are developing. These developing follicles are directly responsible for estrogen production. And the more they develop, the more estrogen that's being produced up until that threshold. Now, ovulation occurs, so it ruptures, goes off into the body. 24, 48 hours later, it gets reabsorbed back in. So the follicle ruptured, it pieced out. The follicle that is then left turns into a gland called the corpus luteum. This gland stays with us for our luteal phase and is the one that is producing progesterone. So without follicle development, which one of these is going to be the egg that then ruptures, is how we produce estrogen. And then post-ovulation, that follicle, that spot that was there, that gland, is what is producing progesterone, which is why our ovarian cycle altogether, this is the ovarian cycle, is responsible for producing hormones, both estrogen and progesterone. Now, once again, we're going to go back and talk about how these hormones, ovulation, is so much more than reproduction because we have hormone receptors throughout our body. So these two hormones play a role, a key role, on pretty much every cell of our body. For instance, estrogen plays a role in muscle growth, insulin sensitivity, in the overall health of our breast health, cardiovascular health, bone health. And the reason for that is because there is an interplay between these two hormones. Most notably is our breast health. So you can think of estrogen as a building hormone. I like to think of it as a builder. So it goes in and builds breast tissue. Now, on the flip side, progesterone, you can think of progesterone as the carpenter or the architect that goes in and makes sure that estrogen isn't building too much. So it helps mitigate the effects because throughout our cycle, our breast tissue will increase and then decrease because of these two hormones that ebb and flow between these two hormones. Some of the other things that progesterone does is reducing inflammation in the body, regulates immune function, and supports our thyroid health, which is also a big impact on our overall hormonal health as well. So these are just a couple of examples because there is a lot more other examples for things like, for instance, our mental health, how estrogen and progesterone impacts our mental health, our digestive system. Honestly, every aspect of us is impacted by these two hormones, which is why they're key or integral to our overall health and well-being. One of the last examples I'll give is our bone density. So how we build our bone density is very different from how male bodies build their bone density. Our bone density is mostly amassed or concentrated in our late teens to early 20s through this ebb and flow of these two hormones. They build up our bone density that we then carry for the rest of our life. So then having this framework of ovulation being more than for reproduction and how it's integral to our overall health, we can start to then have a better appreciation and a relationship with our body because we now understand that ovulation is for our overall health, not about reproduction. So I hope that was helpful for you. Let me know if you have any comments, questions down below. If you want to learn a little bit more about your overall cycle health, so cycle anatomy, I do have a couple of lessons in the How to Heal Your Cycle Naturally Starter Kit. I'll have that link down below. All right, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll be seeing you next time.